We believe that the Prophet Muhammad was born somewhere around 570 CE. We can't precisely pinpoint the exact date of his birth, but right around 570 is when he was born. And he was orphaned at a young age. He was raised first by a grandfather. Eventually, he was raised by an uncle whose name was Abu Talib, which is typed here on the screen. And Abu Talib really did play a very important role for Muhammad as he grew up and during his young adult years. Now, Abu Talib and Muhammad were members of the Quraysh tribe. And remember, in the last video, we talked about the many different tribes of the Arab world and the tribalism, the battling between those many tribes. And Muhammad was born into the Quraysh tribe, which also connects back to the polytheism that we discussed in the last video and the Kaaba, because the Quraysh tribe was the dominant tribe, especially in and around the city of Mecca, and therefore they were also in charge of religious sites like the Kaaba. And therefore the Quraysh tribe was especially connected and invested in the polytheistic culture of pre-Islamic Arabia. They made money as people came to the Kaaba and made offerings and exchanged currency. We could think of a similarity to the people at the temple when Jesus had his famous kind of angry scene at the temple when he was upset that people were making money off the worship of God. In many ways, the Quraysh were also making money, but also gaining power and political influence thanks to their control of the religious sites in and around the city of Mecca. Mecca was a hotbed of trade, and people would come from Mecca from all directions to engage in business. And when there, especially if they were Arab-speaking individuals, they would go to some of these religious sites like the Kaaba. So Muhammad is born into that very powerful tribe that is very invested in the polytheistic culture of the day, very invested in the status quo, because the status quo has given this tribe a lot of power and influence and wealth. Anything that challenges that status quo is obviously a concern to the Quraysh tribe. And obviously, as we've already seen, Muhammad will be a radical challenge to the status quo of pre-Islamic Arabia, which will make him many enemies within his own tribe. But Abu Talib remains a very important figure throughout much of Muhammad's lifetime, precisely because he remains a loyal protector of Muhammad, even after Muhammad begins as a prophet later in life. So Muhammad eventually will get married, and he will marry a wealthy widow, and her name is Khadijah. This is Muhammad's wife, and he marries Khadijah, and this is actually a very significant moment in Muhammad's life, because what little we know about the prophet before he actually started receiving revelations and preaching the message of Islam was that he was a very inquisitive young man. He didn't really seem satisfied by the religious teachings that were being promoted in his culture, the polytheism, the denial of an afterlife, the virtues of strength and power and manliness that were being celebrated, all of the tribal battling. He didn't really seem convinced by that society, by the cultural beliefs and practices that were valued by that society at that time. And once he is married to Khadijah, because of her wealth, he is able to spend more time in retreat, trying to discover more truth than what he believes is being offered by his society. For example, every year, especially during the month of the Arabic calendar, Ramadan, Muhammad is going out into a specific cave outside of the city of Mecca for spiritual retreat, to try to perhaps meditate in certain ways, to discover truth that he doesn't believe has yet been made known to his people, the Arab people of the 7th century. And it is during one of these periods of spiritual retreat, during the month of Ramadan, which I've typed here, that Muhammad all of a sudden will become the prophet. Because during one of these times of retreat, he all of a sudden discovers that he is not alone in this cave. He had always been alone before, but now a visitor appears. And it is a terrifying presence for Muhammad. And the visitor says that he is the angel Gabriel. And he tells Muhammad to recite or read the words that will be given to him. The Arabic term can be translated either way. So initially, when Gabriel says the term, it is usually understood as Gabriel saying, recite the message that I will give you from God. And Muhammad responds immediately by saying, but I cannot recite or read. And oftentimes, the second time the term is used, when Muhammad responds with it, it's translated as read. In other words, this is Muhammad saying that he is not an educated person, perhaps that he is illiterate, that he has never been taught to read, and therefore he cannot do what the angel is asking him to do. In some ways, you think back to the story of Moses from the Hebrew Scriptures or the Christian Old Testament, where Moses is called by God and he says, oh, but I stutter. I can't speak in front of individuals. I'm the wrong person to be chosen to lead the people out of Egyptian slavery. And God eventually tells him that he is going to be used despite his own shortcomings. And in some ways, there is a similarity to what is happening with Muhammad in this cave during the month of Ramadan. This is happening in the year 610. So Muhammad is roughly 40 years old when he first encounters Gabriel. And when he has this first reaction, he basically runs out of the cave because he is so frightened by the presence of Gabriel and what Gabriel seems to be telling him, that he is an angel of the one true God and that he has chosen the prophet Muhammad to be the prophet to promote the truth to the Arab world and beyond. So he runs away, he goes back to his family, his wife and others, and they kind of cover him to help him feel safe once again. And yet Gabriel continues to appear to Muhammad many times. Eventually, Khadijah, Muhammad's wife, takes Muhammad to her cousin, who is a Christian, or at least somewhat connected to the Christian tradition. And when Muhammad tells this cousin what has happened to him and what continues to happen to him with the visitations by the angel Gabriel, the cousin is able to confirm the message that is being given to Muhammad and tells Muhammad that this is real and that he should accept whatever the angel tells him to do. Now you can imagine if this cousin was familiar with the Christian story, if he heard the name Gabriel, he would have thought, oh, well, this is a real angel. Gabriel, the Arabic is Jibril, but Gabriel is the one who came to Mary to announce the important news that Mary had conceived a child who would become Jesus. So clearly his Christian knowledge is able to confirm to Muhammad the reality of the angel Gabriel as an angel from the one true God. And with that, Muhammad is convinced that there is only the one true God and that he must listen to the words that are given to him through the angel Gabriel and do what the angel says, which is recite those words to others. So that first encounter happens in the year 610. And the angel Gabriel will continue to visit the Prophet Muhammad for the rest of Muhammad's life until the year 632, when the Prophet dies. So we have 22, 23 years inclusively of the angel coming to the Prophet, revealing messages and telling the Prophet to recite those messages to others. Right? Now, in the early years, from about 610 to 619, the Prophet isn't having that much success in getting people to listen to the messages that are coming to him from the angel Gabriel. Again, those early messages, often referred to as the early Meccan messages or surahs, a term that we'll see later on when talking about the Quran. But the early Meccan surahs are often very short and very to the point, teaching things like monotheism, an afterlife, a divine judgment, some of those things that we mentioned in the last video that were basic to Muhammad's early message. And remember, they were a radical challenge to the status quo of his time. What this meant is that the people invested in the status quo did not like the teachings of Muhammad. By and large, other than his wife and an early friend named Abu Bakr, whom we'll talk about later on, and some other members of his household, most of the people that were interested in the message that Muhammad was delivering were poor and were perhaps slaves in and around the city of Mecca. After all, it is often the poor, the marginalized, who might be interested in a message that undercuts the status quo because they have the most to gain from a challenge to the status quo. It's very similar to what we see with other important religious figures throughout history. Look even at Jesus. Yes, he had many wealthy individuals start to follow him, but a lot of his followers were poor, and they were the people who might have been the outcast of society, the marginalized of society. The same thing is happening with the Prophet Muhammad in those early years following 610, the first encounter with the angel Gabriel. In 619, everything is going to radically change for the early Muslim community because the Prophet's wife, Khadijah, and his uncle Abu Talib both die within a few months of each other. They had been the ones who were largely responsible for protecting Muhammad and many other members of the early Muslim community from the persecution primarily put forth by the Quraysh tribe, Muhammad's own tribe. In other words, Abu Talib especially could go to the other powerful members of the Quraysh tribe and say, don't worry so much about my nephew. People aren't really going to listen to him. Only the poor, only slaves will listen to him. So there's no reason to start a war with him or to persecute him in any radical way. And that provided protection so that Muhammad could continue to teach his basic message. At one point, there was a group of Muslims who were being persecuted so heavily that Muhammad actually encouraged them to leave Mecca behind and go to another place where they could be safe. Muhammad and most of the Muslims remained in and around Mecca, but the persecution was always present, and we do have stories of violent persecution against the Muslims. But by and large, Muhammad himself and most of the Muslims were protected thanks to the presence of Abu Talib and Khadijah. When they die in 619, less than 10 years into the existence of the Muslim community, the protection is lost. And this means that the persecution is now going to be increased by the powerful members of the Quraysh tribe in and around Mecca. At one point, the Quraysh even pass a policy that forbids people from doing business with known Muslims. And in a society that is built on trade, where everybody is trading what they produce for the goods that they need from others, if you as a Muslim are not able to do business with the majority of people in and around Mecca, this is a very severe form of persecution. Many of the Muslims even have to lose their homes, and they're living just outside the city of Mecca, just trying to survive during the years of 620 and 621, when Muhammad had lost his protection that had been given by Abu Talib and Khadijah. So during these years, things aren't looking great for the early Islamic community. Things are looking very serious and very dire when it comes to even the survival of the community of people following the basic message of Islam that Muhammad is getting revealed to him by the angel Gabriel.